Chapter 8, Mishnah 2. The Mishnah details the order in which heirs inherit when a man dies. The order of inheritance is as follows. The verse states in Numbers chapter 27, verse 8, "When a man dies and there is no son to him, you shall cause his inheritance to be passed to his daughter." This verse teaches that a son comes before a daughter. A person's son is his closest heir and inherits first. We also learn from this verse that any descendant of a son comes before a daughter. That is, if a man dies and his son is no longer alive, but that son left a living son or daughter, the grandchild inherits before a daughter. The next heir, if there are no surviving sons or daughters or their descendants, is the deceased's father, although this is not explicitly mentioned in the Torah. If the father also is no longer alive, the next heir in line is the brother of the deceased, as the verse states, "And if there is no daughter to him, you shall give his inheritance to his brothers." The Mishnah explains this verse in the same way it did the previous one. A daughter comes before the brothers of the deceased, and any descendant of a daughter also comes before the brothers. Therefore, if the daughter left a surviving son or daughter, that grandchild would inherit in the daughter's place. If the person who died left no children or descendants, no father, and no brothers or their descendants, his inheritance passes to his sisters or their descendants. If there are no sisters or descendants still living, the inheritance is given to the grandfather of the deceased. This too is not mentioned in the Torah. If the grandfather too is no longer alive, the estate passes to his children, the brothers of the father, paternal uncles of the deceased. This is the subject of the next verse in the passage, which states, "And if there are no brothers, you shall give his inheritance to the brothers of his father." The Mishnah explains this verse too, as it did the previous ones. Brothers of the deceased come before brothers of the father of the deceased, and descendants of brothers of the deceased come before brothers of the father of the deceased as well. Therefore, if the deceased was survived by a nephew or niece who was the son of one of his brothers, that nephew or niece inherits in his or her father's place before the uncles of the deceased. This is the general rule that applies to all heirs. Any heir that would come first in inheritance, if he were alive, his descendants come first in his place. The Torah does not teach the order of inheritance for more distant relatives, but simply states, "And if there are no brothers of his father, you shall give his inheritance to his relative that is closest to him of his family, and he shall inherit it." The Mishnah provides a final rule to explain how the order of succession is calculated. "And a father comes before all of his descendants. That is, if the deceased left no children or descendants, then the inheritance goes to the father of the deceased before it goes to his brothers. Likewise, if the deceased left no descendants, no father, and no brothers or sisters or inheritance, or their descendants, who would be nephews and nieces of the deceased, the inheritance passes to his grandfather before it goes to his paternal uncles or aunts, who are the grandfather's children. If he also left no paternal uncles or paternal aunts or their descendants, who would be first cousins of the deceased, then the inheritance passes to the great-grandfather. If he too is not alive, it goes to his children, the paternal great-uncles or paternal great-aunts of the deceased, or their descendants, and so on."